Dust and echoes. The wrought iron gates groaned open, a mournful welcome to the crumbling grandeur of Oakhaven Manor. Sunlight filtered weakly through the overgrown trees, painting dappled patterns on the peeling paint of the porch. Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch. Estate sales always felt a little invasive, picking through the remnants of a life laid bare for strangers, but the alternative, another Saturday spent adrift in her silent apartment, felt worse. A wave of dust motes danced in the air. As she stepped inside, the entrance hall was cavernous, smelling faintly of mildew and lavender. Furniture, shrouded in white sheets, loomed like ghostly figures. The air hung thick with the whispers of forgotten conversations, the echoes of laughter and tears. A few other browsers milled about, their voices hushed, as if afraid to disturb the slumbering past. Sarah wandered through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the cold surfaces of antique tables and faded portraits. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just hoping for a distraction, a momentary escape from the gnawing loneliness that had become her constant companion. In a dimly lit corner of the drawing room, tucked away amongst a pile of chipped porcelain dolls and tarnished silver trinkets, she saw it. A doll, unlike the others. It wasn't porcelain, but some kind of composite material, possibly wax, that gave its skin an almost unnervingly lifelike texture. Its dress, though faded and torn, was made of a fine silk, intricately embroidered with tiny flowers, but it was the eyes that held her captive. They were a startling shade of blue, glass perhaps, and seemed to follow her as she moved. An unsettlingly intelligent gaze. She picked it up, surprised by its weight. The doll felt substantial, solid in her hands. A tiny chill ran down her spine, a strange premonition that she couldn't quite place, logically. It was just a doll. An old, slightly creepy doll, but something about it tugged at her, a sense of melancholy and untold stories. An elderly woman with a clipboard, presumably in charge of the sale, shuffled over. Interested in that one, dear? It's quite old, belonged to the Oakhaven's youngest daughter, Clara. She was very attached to it, they say. The woman's voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. It's striking, Sarah said, her gaze still fixed on the doll's face. Some find it unsettling, but it's been here for years, part of the family. The woman shrugged. $5. $5? For something that felt so significant? Sarah's mind argued with itself that it was ridiculous. She didn't need a doll, especially not a doll with eyes that seemed to penetrate her soul, but the isolation clawed at her, the need for something, anything, to fill the void. I'll take it, she said, the words barely audible. As she handed over the crumpled bills, the woman gave her a knowing look. Take good care of her, she murmured, her eyes filled with a strange sadness. Leaving Oakhaven Manor, the doll clutched in her arms. Sarah felt a sense of unease settle over her. The sunlight seemed less bright, the air colder. She glanced down at the doll's face. Its blue eyes stared back, unwavering, as if it knew something she didn't. The prickling sensation on the back of her neck intensified. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, the overactive imagination that always got her into trouble, but deep down, she knew, this doll wasn't just a dusty trinket. It was something more, and she had a feeling her life had just taken a very strange turn. The watchful gaze. Sunlight, strained through the grime of the shop's front window, painted dust motes dancing in the air as Sarah carefully wiped down the doll. Its porcelain face, once marred by dirt and neglect, now gleamed faintly under her gentle ministrations. She'd spent the better part of the afternoon coaxing the grime from its delicate features, a strangely soothing rhythm in the otherwise silent shop. Finally satisfied, she positioned the doll on a small, velvet-draped stand in the center of the display window, nestled amongst tarnished silver teapots and forgotten lockets. It was a prime location, guaranteed to catch the eye of any passerby. Sarah stepped back, hands on her hips, and tilted her head. It did look rather striking, she had to admit. Later, as she straightened a stack of antique postcards near the cash register, she caught a glimpse of the doll from the corner of her eye. Its painted blue eyes seemed brighter than before. She chuckled softly, dismissing it as a trick of the light. The late afternoon sun was playing games with her perception. That was all. She moved to rearrange a collection of vintage buttons, their mother-of-pearl sheen reflecting the light. Again, she felt that prickling sensation, the feeling of being watched. She glanced up, and her breath hitched. The doll's gaze seemed fixed on her, following her movement across the room. Ridiculous, she muttered, her voice barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Dolls didn't follow people with their eyes. It was an optical illusion, a quirk of the way the light hit the painted pupils. To prove it to herself, she walked deliberately from one side of the shop to the other, her gaze fixed on the doll. Each time she stopped, she couldn't shake the feeling that those unnervingly bright blue eyes were tracking her. A shiver snaked down her spine, a cold counterpoint to the warmth of the afternoon sun streaming through the window. She tried to focus on the details of the shop, the comforting scent of aged paper, the soft glow of the antique lamps, the familiar clutter of forgotten treasures. Anything to distract herself. She picked up a small, ornate hand mirror and pretended to examine it, her gaze carefully averted from the window. Yet, even in the reflection, she could sense the doll's presence, a silent, unwavering observer. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. With a frustrated sigh, Sarah marched towards the window. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice a little too loud in the quiet shop. "This is getting silly." She stood directly in front of the doll, her gaze locked on its painted face. Up close, she could see the tiny, almost imperceptible cracks in the porcelain, the delicate brushstrokes that formed its features. It was just a doll, a beautiful, antique doll, but as she stared, the unsettling feeling intensified. It wasn't just the eyes, it was the whole expression, a subtle, almost knowing smirk playing on its painted lips. A wave of unease washed over her, a cold certainty that this was no ordinary object, and she, with her insatiable curiosity, had brought it into her shop, into her life. Whispers in the shop. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer, and Sarah, grateful for the distraction, straightened up from the dusty ledger. It was Mrs. Gable, looking for a replacement button for her prize-winning cardigan. Sarah helped her, carefully matching the color and size, and felt a sliver of normalcy return. Once Mrs. Gable left, though, the silence pressed in again, heavier than before. She returned to the ledger, but the numbers swam before her eyes. A prickling sensation crawled up her spine. She told herself it was the stale air, the dim light. She needed to open a window. As she reached for the latch on the nearest window, a porcelain teacup on the shelf across the room vibrated, then tumbled to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. Sarah gasped, whirling around. She was alone, the window was still firmly shut. Had the shelf been unstable, she hadn't noticed anything wrong before. Kneeling to pick up the shards, a whisper brushed her ear, so faint she almost dismissed it as her imagination. It sounded like a child's voice. She strained to listen, her heart pounding against her ribs. There it was again, a breathy, unintelligible murmur. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The only response was the creaking of the old floorboards. She swept up the porcelain shards, her movements jerky and nervous. The shop felt colder now, a damp chill that seeped into her bones. She glanced at the doll, Eliza, perched on the velvet cushion. A visible shimmer seemed to distort the air around her. Sarah edged closer, drawn in despite her fear. As she neared the doll, a distinct draft swept past her, raising goosebumps on her arms. It didn't feel like a normal breeze, it was an icy gust, concentrated around Eliza. The small, painted eyes seemed to gleam with an unnerving intensity. She reached out a hand, hesitantly, towards the doll's lace dress. Before her fingers could make contact, a stack of books from a nearby table crashed to the floor, scattering pages across the room. Sarah jumped back, a strangled cry escaping her lips. The books lay in disarray, their spines facing different directions, as if someone had deliberately arranged them in a chaotic pattern. Sarah stared, her mind racing. This wasn't just a coincidence, this was something else. She backed away slowly, her gaze fixed on the doll. The air around Eliza seemed to settle, the temperature returning to normal, but the whispers, fainter now, persisted, weaving a thread of unease into the silence. Sarah knew, with a chilling certainty, that she wasn't alone in the shop, and whatever was here, it was somehow connected to the doll. A tragic past. The library smelled of dust and paper, a comforting scent that usually soothed Sarah. Today, however, a nervous energy buzzed beneath her skin, amplified by the fluorescent hum of the overhead lights. She navigated the towering stacks, her fingers trailing along the spines, until she reached the local history section. Ainsworth. She scanned the A's, finding a thick file dedicated to the family. Pulling it from the shelf, Sarah carried the heavy volume to a quiet corner table. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully, the scent of aged paper filling her nostrils. The first few pages were filled with genealogical charts, land deeds, and newspaper clippings detailing the family's prominent role in the town's history. Then, she found it. A small, faded article tucked away in the back. Ainsworth daughter passes away. Her heart skipped a beat. Eliza Ainsworth, the girl from the estate sale photographs. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes scanning the dense text. The article stated that Eliza had succumbed to a sudden illness at the age of 8. A brief, almost dismissive announcement. Too brief. Sarah flipped through the remaining pages, finding other mentions of Eliza, mostly birth announcements and society page mentions of her attending local events. Nothing that hinted at the tragedy to come. Frustration gnawed at her. She needed more. She spent the next hour poring over microfilms of old newspapers, her eyes burning from the flickering screen. Finally, she struck gold. A small, gossipy column, buried in the back pages of a paper from 1918. It spoke of whispers surrounding Eliza's death. A mysterious wasting illness, it called it. Some say a broken heart. A broken heart. At 8 years old, Sarah frowned. The article hinted at a young boy, a frequent visitor to the Ainsworth estate, who had suddenly disappeared from Eliza's life shortly before her illness. The author implied a forbidden childhood romance, stifled by the rigid social expectations of the time. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for the little girl, imagining Eliza, isolated and heartbroken, in that grand, imposing house. Sent a chill down her spine. Was the doll a memento of that lost love, a tangible piece of Eliza's fractured heart? Closing the microfilm reader, Sarah rubbed her tired eyes. The whispers of a mysterious illness and a secret heartbreak swirled in her mind. This was more than just a child who had died too young. There was a story here, buried beneath layers of societal decorum and unspoken grief. A story that the doll, perhaps, was trying to tell. A sudden gust of wind rattled the library windows, causing Sarah to jump. She glanced around, feeling a prickle of unease. The library, once comforting, now felt heavy with the weight of the past. She gathered her notes, a newfound determination hardening her gaze. She had to know the truth about Eliza Ainsworth, and about the doll that seemed to carry her sorrow, the historian's tale. The scent of dust and old paper hit Sarah like a physical wave as Elias Thorne opened his front door. It wasn't an unpleasant smell, more like the comforting aroma of a well-loved antique. Elias, a wiry man with spectacles perpetually perched on the tip of his nose, beamed at her. "Sarah, my dear, come in. I was just brewing a pot of chamomile, good for the nerves, you know, and with the circumstances." He trailed off, his eyes twinkling with morbid curiosity. His home was less a house and more a living archive. Stacks of yellowed newspapers teetered precariously, threatening to topple. Maps, their edges frayed and brittle, lined the walls, each a silent testament to the town's long history. Sarah carefully navigated a path through the organized chaos, her fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound books. "So," Elias began, gesturing for her to sit on a chair half buried under genealogical charts. "The doll, tell me everything." Sarah hesitated, pulling the doll, wrapped in a clean tea towel, from her bag. Its painted eyes, even shrouded, seemed to stare right through her. "I bought it at the Ainsworth estate sale. Ever since, I've been well, let's just say things haven't been normal." She recounted the unsettling feeling of being watched, the misplaced objects, the chilling whispers. Elias listened intently, nodding occasionally, his gaze fixed on the doll. When she finished, he steepled his fingers. The Ainsworths, a prominent family, though plagued by tragedy. Eliza was their youngest, a delicate child, prone to illness. He paused, his eyes clouding with remembered sorrow. "She died young, you see. A fever took her when she was only 7. He rose and shuffled to a bookshelf, pulling out a slim volume. "Here," he said, handing it to Sarah. "A collection of local poems." Eliza wrote several herself, quite precocious, they said. She adored that doll, always carried it with her. Sarah flipped through the fragile pages, her heart aching at the sight of Eliza's childish scrawl. The poem spoke of dreams and fears, of a love for the world and a longing for something more. "What happened to her doll after she died?" Elias sighed, a sound like rustling parchment. "Ah, that's where the story gets interesting. Rumor has it, Mrs. Ainsworth, in her grief, couldn't bear to part with it. She kept it locked away in Eliza's room. Some even said, well, they said Eliza's spirit became attached to it, that the doll was a vessel for her essence." Sarah felt a shiver crawl down her spine. "You mean, it's haunted?" Elias shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Haunted is such a loaded word. Let's just say some believe a part of Eliza Ainsworth remains within that doll, a lingering echo of a life cut short. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They say if you listen closely, you can sometimes hear her, whispering secrets from the past. Nightmares and visions. Sleep offered no sanctuary, instead dragging Sarah into a maelstrom of nightmares. She found herself in Ainsworth Manor's choked garden, the air a cloying blend of mildew and rotting vegetation. Eliza's voice, a threadbare rasp, drifted from the house's shadowed apertures, whispering her name. Sarah, help me. In the dreamscape, the house stood as a gaunt spectre against a bruised, twilight sky. The front door creaked open, revealing a hall swamped by obscurity. An inexorable force tugged at her, an urge to cross the threshold despite the primal alarm bells ringing in her mind. Fragmentary images flickered, a rocking horse creaking in solitude, a shattered porcelain doll sprawled on the floor, a crimson stain marring a threadbare rug. Each vision burned with stark clarity, etching itself onto her psyche. She awoke with a jolt, entangled in the bedclothes, Eliza's spectral plea still echoing in her thoughts. The digital clock blazed 3:17 a.m., though bone-weary, sleep proved elusive, supplanted by a crawling disquiet. Her gaze fixed on the ceiling, where weak moonlight painted elongated, grotesque shadows. The doll observed her from the shelf opposite the bed, a silent, glassy-eyed sentry. The following day at the antique shop offered little respite. Sarah's attention fragmented, her hands shaky. As she handled a cracked teacup, the shop's bell chimed, announcing a visitor, but even as she summoned a smile, the sound returned. Sarah. More muted this time, almost subliminal, yet undeniably Eliza's voice. Sarah stiffened, her eyes darting across the room, but no one appeared to have spoken, only the refrigerator's drone, the grandfather clock's measured cadence, and the disquieting stillness of the doll perched on the shelf behind the counter. Later that afternoon, Sarah could have sworn the doll shifted. She'd been meticulously indexing a cache of vintage postcards, her back turned to the shelf. Upon pivoting, she noticed the doll's head cocked at a different angle, its painted gaze bearing down on her with unsettling focus. She attributed it to tricks of the light, the phantom of her sleep-starved mind, but a seed of apprehension had taken root. Driven by a desperate need to exorcise the unsettling presence, Sarah resolved to donate the doll to a local thrift store. She secured it within a box, drove it across town, and deposited it anonymously on their doorstep. After closing, a wave of relief cascaded over her as she sped away, a brittle hope that this would finally sever the connection. The next morning, however, the doll had returned. It sat upon the shelf in her apartment, its porcelain countenance gleaming in the early light. The box she'd used for its transportation lay neatly folded beside it. A frigid wave of terror washed through Sarah. This transcended mere sensation, this was something else entirely. Eliza's diary. The attic air hung thick and heavy, smelling of dust and forgotten summers. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floorboards, the porcelain doll cradled in her lap. Eliza's painted eyes, usually unsettling, seemed almost pleading in the dim light filtering through the grimy window. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy, a certainty that Eliza was more than just a relic. She was trapped, and Sarah, inexplicably, felt compelled to help. "I'm going to figure this out," she whispered, running a careful hand over the doll's smooth, cold cheek. Where to start? She examined the elaborate dress, its lace yellowed with age, then the meticulously styled wig. Nothing seemed amiss. Next, she turned her attention to the porcelain body, her fingers tracing the delicate curves, searching for any irregularity. Then, she felt it. A slight give near the base of the doll's neck. Pressing gently, a small, almost invisible panel popped open, revealing a hollow compartment. Inside, nestled amongst faded velvet lining, was a tiny, leather-bound diary. Sarah's breath hitched. This was it. With trembling hands, she opened the diary. The pages were brittle and filled with a delicate, spidery script written in faded ink. Eliza Ainsworth, it read on the first page, followed by a date from the late 1800s. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She began to read. Arthur visited today. My heart fluttered like a trapped bird the moment I saw him riding up the lane. He spoke of poetry and faraway lands, of adventures I could only dream of. Oh, how I longed to be more than just a friend in his eyes. Sarah continued, her heart aching for the young Eliza. The diary entries revealed a sensitive soul, full of dreams and quiet longings. Page after page spoke of Arthur, his kindness, his wit, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about his aspirations. That it was clear Eliza was deeply, hopelessly in love, but as Sarah read further, a darker thread began to emerge. The coughing has worsened, mother worries, but I try to reassure her that it's just a chill. I say, nothing more, but the weariness lingers, a heavy cloak I cannot shed. That I fear this cough is something far more sinister. The entries became less frequent, filled with increasing anxiety and a growing sense of resignation. Eliza wrote of sleepless nights, haunted by shadows and filled with a debilitating exhaustion. She spoke of doctors and their grim pronouncements, of remedies that offered no relief. The vibrant, hopeful voice that had filled the earlier pages was fading, replaced by a quiet despair. Arthur is leaving, one entry read, barely legible, the ink smudged as if stained by tears. He's accepted a position in London. That he held my hand and wished me well. That he doesn't know I would follow him to the ends of the earth, even if it meant leaving everything behind. That he will never know. The last entry was dated just a few weeks later. It was short, barely a whisper on the page. The shadows are closing in. I see him in my dreams, his face a blur, his voice a distant echo. I am so tired. Sarah closed the diary, her eyes stinging with tears. Eliza's story was heartbreaking, a tale of unrequited love and a life tragically cut short. Now, she understood, Eliza wasn't just a restless spirit, she was a soul yearning for peace, trapped by the weight of her unspoken feelings and the fear of her illness. Sarah knew what she had to do. She had to help Eliza find her Arthur, somehow. A meeting across time. The address was a small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of town, a riot of overgrown roses clinging desperately to its walls. Sarah hesitated, the worn paper clutched in her hand. Arthur Penhaligon, could this really be him? Taking a deep breath, she walked up the cracked path and knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a man whose face was a roadmap of time, etched with wrinkles that spoke of a life lived quietly. His eyes, though faded, held a spark of intelligence, a flicker of the young man she'd seen in the faded photographs. Mr. Penhaligon? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his gaze questioning. Yes, and you are? Sarah plunged in, the carefully rehearsed words tumbling out in a rush. My name is Sarah Walker. I bought something at the Ainsworth estate sale. A doll, Eliza. His breath hitched. A tremor ran through his hand as he reached out to steady himself against the doorframe. Eliza, he murmured, the name a ghost on his tongue. Sarah explained everything, the strange occurrences, the unsettling feeling of being watched, the whispers that seemed to emanate from the doll. She spoke of Eliza's trapped spirit, her unfulfilled yearning. Arthur listened, his face a shifting mask of disbelief, grief, and a long-buried emotion that Sarah couldn't quite decipher. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy. This is a lot to take in, but I knew Eliza. We were close. He looked away, his gaze lost in the tangled roses. What do you want from me? Eliza wants closure, Sarah said gently. I think she needs to know she wasn't forgotten. He remained silent for a long moment, his shoulders slumped. I'm an old man, Miss Walker. I don't know if I can help. Just a meeting, Sarah pleaded. A chance to acknowledge her. That's all. The antique shop was unusually quiet when Arthur arrived the next day. The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax and old paper. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, his hand resting on a polished walking stick. Sarah watched him approach, her heart pounding in her chest. Eliza, she sensed, was present, a palpable shiver in the air. Sarah carefully placed the doll on the counter. Arthur stared at it, his expression unreadable. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the porcelain cheek. Eliza, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Oh, Eliza. I should have said it. I should have told you how I felt. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. I loved you, Eliza. I loved you more than words can say, but I was a fool. A coward. The shop felt warmer, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. Sarah watched, tears blurring her vision, as Arthur finally said the words that had been locked away for so long. The air crackled with a sudden burst of energy, then settled into a profound stillness. Whether Eliza had heard, Sarah couldn't be sure, but a sense of peace, however fragile, had settled over the room. Peace at last. The air in the attic grew thick, charged with a silent plea. Arthur, his face etched with years of regret, finally met the doll's unwavering gaze. "Eliza," he rasped, his voice a fragile whisper that seemed to carry the weight of decades. I never forgot you, never." His confession hung in the air, a tangible thing. Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. The antique shop, usually a haven of forgotten treasures, felt like a courtroom. Arthur the defendant, Eliza the silent plaintiff. "My father, he forbade me from seeing you, said you weren't suitable." Arthur's eyes, usually clouded with confusion, now burned with a painful clarity. "I was weak, Eliza, that a coward, that I should have stood up to him." A tremor ran through the room, the dust motes dancing in the faint sunlight shifted, swirling like tiny spirits caught in a whirlwind. Sarah felt a sudden wave of warmth wash over her, starting at her toes and rising to the tips of her ears. It was an all-encompassing heat, not uncomfortable, but strangely comforting, like being enveloped in a loving embrace. Arthur continued, his voice breaking, "I loved you, Eliza. More than words can say. That I carried your memory with me every single day." He reached out a trembling hand, hovering just inches from the doll's porcelain face. "Please, forgive me." Then, something shifted. The doll's eyes, those piercing, unsettling eyes that had followed Sarah with such intensity, seemed to soften, the rigid lines around the painted mouth relaxed, the unnerving stare lessening. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. The feeling of being watched, that constant prickle on the back of her neck, began to fade. Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a quiet understanding that had been absent since she brought the doll home. The oppressive weight that had clung to the attic, the whispers that had haunted her sleep, evaporated like morning mist. Eliza had heard him, she had been acknowledged. Arthur slumped back in his chair, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. He looked exhausted, but also strangely relieved. The years of guilt and regret were etched in the lines around his eyes, but there was a lightness there now, a sense of burden lifted. Silence descended. A welcome, peaceful silence. The air felt clean, free of the heavy energy that had permeated it for so long. The only sound was Arthur's soft, ragged breathing. Sarah approached the doll, hesitantly reaching out to touch its velvet dress. It no longer felt cold and menacing, but simply old, an antique with a story to tell. She picked it up, cradling it in her arms. The porcelain felt smooth and cool against her skin. The doll's eyes, though still painted, no longer held that unsettling intensity. They were just eyes, the eyes of a doll. She knew she would keep it, not as a haunted relic, but as a reminder of love, loss, and the importance of helping lost souls find their peace. It would sit on a shelf, a silent testament to a love story long past, and a symbol of the quiet resolution she had helped bring about. The antique shop felt safe again, the shadows banished, the dolls no longer whispering in the night.